You ever have one of those days where you're just trying to live your life, and suddenly someone shows up acting like they're the sheriff of your backyard? That was last Tuesday for me. I just finished putting the roof on the new shed I built behind my garage. Nothing fancy, just a place to store my tools and keep the lawnmower out of the rain. I was standing there with a cold lemonade, admiring the finished job when I heard it, a throat clearing. Loudly. Deliberately. I turned around and there she was. Shoulder-length frosted blonde hair, sunglasses even though it was cloudy, clipboard clutched like it was a weapon. Sandra Whitlow, self-appointed queen of our little cul-de-sac. She was wearing a beige cardigan like it was armor and had that tight, pinched look on her face that you only see on flight attendants right before they throw someone off the plane. "Mr. Nolan Easton," she said, like she was reading my name off a warrant. "I'm here on behalf of the HOA to inform you that your shed violates Section 5, Article 14 of the Neighborhood Architectural Guidelines." I blinked at her. "Come again. Your shed," she pointed with her pen, "is not approved. It exceeds the height limit, is constructed without an HOA permit, and is in violation of communal aesthetic standards. You'll be fined $400 and you have 7 days to remove it." I just stared at her for a second, then looked at my shed. Solid walls, shingled roof. Painted to match the house. Looked better than half the homes on the block, frankly. "Sandra," I said slowly, "there is no HOA here." She actually laughed. "Don't be ridiculous. I've been president of the Willow Glen HOA for 6 years. Yeah, and that HOA was dissolved 8 years ago when the developer transferred control to the homeowners, and no one renewed the charter." She raised both eyebrows like I'd just spoken in tongues. "That's incorrect. We've been operating continuously. Monthly newsletters, annual meetings you host in your living room with your friends Marla and Betty from 2 doors down. Yeah, I've seen those. You bake cookies and complain about everyone's lawns." Her lips tightened. "Regardless, we have the authority to impose fines. You'll be receiving an official notice." I crossed my arms. "And who's collecting the fines?" "You." She didn't answer, just handed me a crumpled paper with a logo that looked like it had been made in Microsoft Word in 2003, and stormed off down the sidewalk like she couldn't believe I'd dared talk back. I stood there for a moment, watching her march away like a dictator who just got told the peasants were out of pitchforks. Then I went inside, pulled up the county records, and started printing every document I'd need. Because if Sandra Whitlow wanted to play HOA president, I was about to show her she was leading a fantasy league. By the time the sun dipped behind the hills that evening, I had a manila folder thick with printouts. County property plats. Dissolution records. A letter from the developer's lawyer dated 8 years ago, clearly stating the HOA was officially disbanded and no longer recognized by the county. It even had one of those heavy blue ink signatures that scream, "This is not a joke." I wasn't looking for a fight. I just wanted to enjoy my yard in peace. But if someone decided to fabricate authority and start shaking down neighbors like it was a shakedown racket, they were going to get their house of cards knocked over in front of everyone. The next morning, I walked down to City Hall. Not for help, just for clarity. I'd seen Sandra's type before. She wouldn't take no from me. But maybe she'd take it from someone wearing a badge or holding a gavel. Mrs. Rios, the city clerk, was kind enough to dig into the Public Association records while I waited. She had a mug on her desk that said, "I file things you wouldn't believe." And after 15 minutes of clicking and sighing, she turned her monitor slightly toward me. "Willow Glen Homeowners Association," she said, tapping the screen. "Inactive, not reinstated, no filings, no charter renewals. No legal authority to collect dues or enforce policies since June of 2012. I nodded. "And if someone is issuing fines or pretending to act on behalf of it," she gave me a look from over her glasses. "That's fraud, Mr. Easton." When I got back to the neighborhood, I saw something taped to my mailbox. It was a pink carbon copy of a violation notice. The paper was crooked, the font different from the one she handed me yesterday. This one included a late processing fee of $75 and a threat to report me to collections. What caught my eye, though, was the fine print at the bottom. It listed a P.O. box address, and under that, a line that read, "Payment remittance made to Willow Glen Management Fund." Not a bank, not an escrow, just a name that sounded official enough to fool someone who wasn't paying attention. I wasn't dealing with an overzealous neighbor anymore. This was someone trying to run an unlicensed racket. That evening, I visited Jack Langley, a retired detective living 2 streets over. He was the kind of guy who still carried himself like he was on the force broad shoulders, eyes always scanning. He'd once helped a neighbor catch a package thief using an old wildlife camera and a fishing line rigged to a mailbox. I laid everything out on his dining room table. "You think she's pocketing the money?" I asked. He studied the documents, tapping one finger on the P.O. box. "She's not registered as a property manager, no corporate entity, no 501c3 status. This isn't just shady, it's impersonation and mail fraud." He pulled out his phone and made a call. I didn't ask who, but from the tone, it wasn't a casual chat. 10 minutes later, he looked up. "Got someone in financial crimes. They'll take a look. Keep everything, don't touch the notice." The next morning, I installed a high-definition camera facing the front of my property. Not because I was afraid, but because I knew what was coming next. Sure enough, Friday evening, while I was grilling dinner, I saw Sandra standing near the edge of my lawn, arms folded, lips moving fast as she talked to my next-door neighbor, Mrs. Lynn. I couldn't hear her, but I could see Mrs. Lynn's posture stiffen. I walked over, tongs still in hand. "Evening, Sandra. Need something?" She turned, clearly trying to smile, but her jaw was too tight. Just explaining the importance of community standards. Mrs. Lynn gave me a quick glance. She said we could be fined if we didn't side with the HOA. I turned to Sandra. "That true?" Sandra's eyes flicked to the camera on my roof. "We're simply encouraging compliance." By threatening fines from a non-existent organization, her eyes narrowed. "I don't appreciate your tone." I held up the folder. "And I don't appreciate fraud. You've been issuing fake legal documents, collecting money from neighbors, and pretending to represent an authority that doesn't exist. That's a crime." She opened her mouth, then closed it again. "You've got about 24 hours to send out retractions and refund every dime you conned out of folks, or the city's financial crimes unit will be doing it for you." She stared at me, her hands clenched at her sides. No clipboard this time, no paper. Just her and the realization that the game was unraveling. "I've invested years of work maintaining this neighborhood," she said finally, voice trembling. "Someone has to uphold standards. Not like this. You want to start a new HOA, you go through the proper channels. You don't impersonate one and fleece your neighbors." She turned and walked briskly away, not looking back. Later that night, I got a call from Jack. The investigation had been greenlit. Turns out Sandra had collected nearly $12,000 over the last 3 years, mostly from elderly residents who didn't know any better. She'd set up the P.O. box under a fake business name and funneled the money into a personal account under the guise of community beautification. What's more, she'd altered county documents to make it look like the HOA had been reinstated, using a forged signature of a developer who'd moved to Arizona years ago. By Sunday, 2 plainclothes officers were walking up her front steps while half the block pretended not to watch from behind curtains. She didn't answer the door. They left with a search warrant tucked under one arm. Her house was dark the next 2 nights. Then Monday morning, a moving truck pulled up. No goodbyes, no explanations, just boxes and a tired-looking man, her husband, I assumed, carrying furniture out while she paced the porch, phone in hand, talking low and fast. The neighborhood newsletter stopped arriving. The violations vanished. The fake mailbox notices? Gone. A week later, Mrs. Lynn organized a block party. People brought food, lawn chairs, and stories. Turns out I wasn't Sandra's only target. She'd find someone for planting marigolds. Someone else got a warning for a non-compliant porch light. But the best part. The city posted a notice on the old community board. Unauthorized representation of defunct homeowner groups is illegal under municipal code. Residents are encouraged to report suspicious activity. Sandra's name wasn't mentioned, but everyone knew. As for the shed, still standing, still solid. Occasionally, someone walks by and compliments it. I tell them the truth. It's not just a shed. It's a monument to standing your ground. And every time I look at it, I remember how quickly a fake empire collapses when you build it on lies, especially in a neighborhood full of people who finally decided they weren't going to be pushed around anymore. The morning after Sandra's abrupt exit, the neighborhood was eerily quiet. It wasn't the kind of silence that comes with peace, it was the heavy stillness that lingers after a storm. People were walking their dogs a little slower, watering their gardens a little longer, everyone waiting to see if the dust had really settled. I was in my backyard trimming the hedge when I heard the gate creak open. I looked up, pruning shears still in one hand, to see a man in a crisp charcoal suit standing just inside the fence. Late 50s, clean-shaven, polished shoes, holding a black leather portfolio. He gave me a polite nod. "Mr. Easton?" "That's me," I said cautiously. "Detective Raymond Keller, Financial Crimes Division. You've been in contact with Jack Langley." I nodded and gestured toward the patio. "You want to sit?" He declined with a shake of his head. "Just here to ask a few follow-up questions." "Your cooperation's already been helpful, but we're expanding the investigation. We've traced multiple payments to an account linked to Sandra Whitlow, but the scope's grown beyond what we initially expected." "How far beyond?" I asked. "She's been running similar schemes in 3 other neighborhoods over the last 5 years. All under different names: Cedar Point Council, Willow Terrace Standards Board, and Silver Ridge Association. Each one claimed to be a functioning HOA, complete with forged documents and fake bylaws." I leaned back against the railing. "You're telling me she's been running a circuit?" She'd start with newsletters, then escalate to fines. Same pattern every time. She targeted neighborhoods without active HOAs, especially ones with a lot of retirees. Low resistance, high trust. That P.O. box she used, it was registered under a shell company. We've got records of bank transfers, deposits, even a fake business license. She used to keep it under the radar. What happens next? She'll be formally charged. Wire fraud, mail fraud, impersonation of a legal entity, and a few others. It's not just a slap on the wrist. I watched him flip open his portfolio and jot something down. "You said she hit 3 other neighborhoods. We're still notifying victims. A lot of folks never questioned the payments. They thought they were keeping their homes in compliance. One woman in Silver Ridge paid over $3,000 in landscape violations over 2 years. My stomach turned. You gonna be able to get their money back? We're working on freezing the accounts. If she hasn't moved the funds offshore, there's a good chance of restitution. But it's going to take time." He closed the portfolio and gave me a nod of appreciation. "You standing your ground gave us a trail to follow. Most people don't push back." After he left, I stood there for a long time just staring at the spot where he'd been. It was one thing to take a swing at your own neighborhood, but that was industrial-scale grifting. A few days later, a county official showed up with a clipboard and a survey vest. He walked the perimeter of my lot, checked measurements, and took a few photos of the shed from different angles. When I asked what he was doing, he explained that the county had opened a formal review into unlawful code enforcement. Apparently, complaints had been filed under Sandra's name, listing her as a volunteer compliance officer, a title that didn't exist in any official capacity. She'd submitted forms with forged letterheads to pressure certain homeowners into trimming trees, repainting shutters, even removing solar panels. She told people she was working with the county, I asked. Not just told them she filed under our system, used a former employee's credentials. "We're auditing everything now. If she accessed internal resources, this goes from fraud to unauthorized access of government systems. That night, I dug through the neighborhood's old community bulletin board files, the ones stored online. Sandra had posted dozens of notices over the years, some about light pollution mitigation, others about seasonal lawn conformity. All signed with her name and all referencing regulations that didn't exist. I forwarded the entire archive to Detective Keller. The next morning, I got a call from Marisol, who lived on the far end of the block. She was in tears. Her elderly mother, who'd recently moved in with her, had paid Sandra nearly $800 in driveway resurfacing compliance fees. When Marisol had questioned the fee, Sandra told her that refusal would result in legal seizure of property. Her mother, terrified of losing her home, had paid in cash. This wasn't neighborhood drama anymore. This was predation. By the end of the week, a town hall meeting was called at the local community center. Word had spread fast Sandra's house was empty, her accounts frozen, and her name now featured in a county-wide alert. The meeting room was packed. Folding chairs lined every wall. A few people stood near the back, arms crossed, waiting for explanations. A woman from the district attorney's office stepped up to the podium. She introduced herself as Assistant DA Carla Monroe and spoke in a calm, firm voice. Over the past several years, Miss Sandra Whitlow conducted a pattern of fraudulent activity across multiple residential communities. She presented herself as a legal authority, fabricated documents, and collected thousands of dollars under false pretenses. She has been taken into custody and is currently awaiting arraignment. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. She created fake associations, issued fabricated fines, and used intimidation tactics. We have evidence of unauthorized access to municipal systems, identity fraud, and coercion of elderly residents. Every victim will be contacted directly. We're working with financial institutions to recover stolen funds. Hands shot up across the room. An older man near the front asked, "Is there any legal recourse for those of us who made changes to our homes based on her demands?" Monroe nodded. "Yes. We're coordinating with a legal aid group that specializes in fraudulent HOA enforcement. They'll be assisting residents in filing claims for compensation, including costs incurred due to her false orders." A woman in a floral dress stood up. "She made me rip out my vegetable garden, said it violated cultivation limits." Monroe's eyes didn't waver. "That's not a real regulation." "There will be restitution." After the meeting, people lingered, some angry, some relieved, all of them processing. I ended up near the refreshments table with Jack Langley. "She picked the wrong neighborhood," he said, sipping his coffee. "You pushed back. Most people would have just paid and kept quiet. She went after people who couldn't fight back. That's what gets me." She counted on fear, folks thinking they didn't have a choice. I nodded. "Well, now they know better." He gave a slow, thoughtful nod. "And next time someone tries pulling this again, they'll find a neighborhood that knows how to document, report, and push back hard." Later that week, a group of residents formed a volunteer committee, not an HOA, but a neighborhood support network. No dues, no fines, just folks helping each other. They printed out flyers explaining resident rights, held workshops on spotting fraud, and even set up a hotline for reporting suspicious activity. People brought over cookies, shared lawn tools, helped repaint a few fences that had been dinged by Sandra's notices. The neighborhood didn't just recover, it got stronger. Sandra had tried to build a kingdom out of paperwork, intimidation, and fake titles. But when the illusion shattered, it left behind something real. A community that didn't need a queen to hold it together, and me. I finally finished organizing the inside of my shed, hung up every tool, labeled every drawer. When neighbors stopped by, I'd show them the automatic pulley system I'd rigged for the ladder. They'd laugh, ask questions, maybe borrow a wrench. It wasn't just a shed anymore. It was proof that the only thing you ever need to stand your ground is the truth, a little backbone, and the willingness to say, "No, not here." 2 weeks passed, and my street had settled into a new rhythm. No more mysterious notices, no more hushed arguments at the curb. People were starting to reclaim the space Sandra had tried to control, and a few even planted flowers in their front yards, bright pops of rebellion where once there'd been fear of phantom violations. The whole place felt lighter, like the neighborhood had been holding its breath for years and finally exhaled. But just when I thought the storm had passed, something strange happened. It started with a phone call from the county assessor's office. A woman named Bernice had a voice like gravel and politeness honed from years of dealing with difficult people. She asked me to confirm my property boundaries, then paused. "We received a request to reclassify part of your parcel as common-use land," she said, puzzled. It was flagged because the applicant submitted a signature from someone who hasn't had development rights over that area in over a decade. Who submitted it? Application says Willow Glen Homeowners Committee, signed by a Sandra Whitlow. I felt my stomach tighten. That group doesn't exist. "She's under investigation," Bernice cleared her throat. "That's why we flagged it. But here's the part that concerns me. This wasn't submitted 2 weeks ago. It was filed 6 months back." That hit like a punch to the chest. 6 months ago, long before Sandra had ever stepped foot on my property to argue about my shed, she was already trying to change the legal status of my land. I asked Bernice to email me the scanned documents. When they arrived, I read them 3 times. The form named a section of my backyard, specifically the area where my shed now stood, as proposed community utility space. It claimed the land had been donated by unanimous consent for future use, as a shared storage compound for HOA equipment and seasonal maintenance tools. There were even fabricated meeting minutes attached, listing votes from people who had never attended a single meeting in their lives. One name stood out, Mr. Havorson, who had passed away 2 years ago. I printed everything and drove straight to Jack Langley's house. He was in his garage tuning up his old Harley, grease on his knuckles and a radio humming low in the background. "She tried to steal my land, Jack," I said without preamble, handing him the packet. He flipped through the papers slowly. His eyebrows drew closer with every page. When he reached the meeting minutes, he let out a breath through his nose. "That's not just fraud," he said. "That's attempted property theft using forged documentation. If this had slipped through the county's system, it'd be a nightmare to unwind. Can this still go through?" He shook his head. "Not now. It got flagged, but think about the timing. She tried to reclassify your yard before you even built the shed. That wasn't about aesthetics. She had plans for that space." That night, I compiled every message, photo, and legal document I had. I filed an official complaint with the district attorney's office, attaching everything Bernice had sent. Within 48 hours, I got a call from Ada Monroe herself. "She filed these applications before her known violations," she said. "This introduces a new angle: premeditation. If we can establish that she intended to claim private land under false pretenses, that escalates the charges." I asked what that meant exactly. "Conspiracy to commit real estate fraud, forgery of government documents, attempted unlawful transfer of property. This isn't just a scam anymore. It's a felony-level land grab." By the end of the week, the DA's office had executed a search warrant on a storage unit Sandra had rented under a different name. Inside, they found a trove of documents, fake association ledgers, rubber stamps with titles like Regional Compliance Officer, and a stack of blank violation forms ready to be filled in. Among them was a binder labeled Future Parcels, which listed several addresses in our neighborhood, including mine. Next to each was a handwritten note, reclaimable if no resistance. I was stunned. She'd created a playbook to harvest land she didn't own, counting on confusion and inaction to get away with it. The media picked up the story within days. Local news ran a segment titled "The Phantom President," showing images of the fake notices and snippets of the bogus meeting minutes. Neighbors I hadn't spoken to in years knocked on my door just to say they'd seen my name mentioned and couldn't believe it. One man down the street even offered to help repaint my fence as a thank you. The next court hearing was open to the public. Jack came with me, as did a dozen neighbors. We sat in the second row while Sandra was brought in wearing a slate gray suit that looked a size too big. She didn't look at anyone. As the charges were read aloud, the courtroom was silent. When the judge reached the part about falsifying legal documents to reclassify private property, Sandra's shoulders stiffened, and her attorney leaned in to whisper something. She didn't respond. Later, during a recess, Monroe found me in the hallway. "She didn't act alone," she said quietly. "We've linked 2 notaries to multiple forged documents. One of them is already cooperating. They helped her backdate approvals to make her fake associations look legitimate." "Were they in on the scam?" I asked. Hard to say yet. "But they knowingly stamped signatures from people who were either deceased or never present. That's a serious offense." By the time the final charges were filed, Sandra faced over a dozen counts, including conspiracy, wire fraud, forgery, and attempted unlawful reclassification of land. The court denied her bail on the grounds of flight risk, citing the discovery of a second passport under a different name and a one-way ticket to Belize found in her desk drawer. The sentencing came 4 months later. By then, the neighborhood had fully transformed. A community garden had been started in the vacant lot where Sandra used to host her meetings. People donated tools, and high school volunteers built raised beds. No one talked about fines anymore. They talked about compost and tomato varieties. At the sentencing, Monroe delivered a statement that struck a chord with everyone in the courtroom. "This case isn't just about fraud," she said. "It's about someone using the illusion of authority to manipulate and intimidate." She preyed on trust and weaponized bureaucracy. But she underestimated the people paying attention. Sandra was sentenced to 9 years, with eligibility for parole after 6. Restitution was ordered in full, and the court seized her assets to compensate victims. The judge made a point to address the neighborhood directly. "You were not just victims, you were vigilant, and you reminded the system that power, when misused, can and must be challenged." After the verdict, Monroe approached me outside the courthouse. "You ever think about running for city council?" she asked. I laughed. "Not unless they let me hold meetings in my shed," she smiled. "That shed saved a lot more than your tools." That night I stood in the backyard, lantern swinging gently from the hook over the doorway. The shed looked different now, not physically, but in what it represented. It was a line in the sand, a place where someone said, "No more." And the funny thing was, it had never been about the shed. Not really. It was about someone trying to take what wasn't theirs, using fear as a weapon, assuming no one would notice, but someone did. And now, every time I open that door, I remember exactly what it stands for. Not just a place to store rakes and socket wrenches, but the place where a lie got exposed, a fraud got stopped, and a neighborhood finally stood up for itself.